Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where becoming a wife wasn't simply a matter of falling in love and saying, I do. You're standing in a drafty stone cottage in rural England, 1680, watching your mother inspect the linen chest you've been filling since you turned 12. Her fingers trace the uneven stitches of your first attempt at embroidery, a lopsided rose that makes you cringe even now. Outside, the village women are already whispering about whether you'll be ready in time, whether your dowry will be enough, whether the blacksmith's son will even consider you worthy. This isn't a romantic comedy. This is an audition for a role you'll play for the rest of your life, and everyone's watching. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for. Why that great-great-grandmother in your family tree married so late, or why another never married at all. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, what time it is in your corner of the world, or maybe just share what intrigues you most about history's hidden expectations. Your words create a community of curious minds, all drifting towards sleep together. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're learning to spin wool before you can write your own name. Your fingers are clumsy at first, the thread breaking again and again as your grandmother sighs from her chair by the fire. This skill isn't optional. In most of Europe, from the medieval period through the 19th century, a woman's ability to transform raw flax or wool into usable thread, then into cloth, then into garments and household linens, serves as her resume. Potential mothers-in-law actually visit homes to inspect a young woman's work. They run their hands over the texture of her woven fabric. Checking for consistent tension, they hold her spun thread up to the light, looking for thick and thin spots that reveal inexperience or, worse, laziness. The word spinster originates from this very requirement, before it becomes a slightly pitying term for unmarried women. It simply describes a woman's occupation. She spins. But here's the twist historians love to debate. Did the term become associated with unmarried women because spinning was what unmarried women did while waiting for marriage? Or because women who were particularly skilled at spinning could support themselves and therefore didn't need husbands? The chicken and egg question keeps academics arguing in journal articles to this day. You're also mastering the art of bread making, but not just any bread. You need to prove you can judge the readiness of dough by feel, that you understand how weather affects rising times, that you can manage a hearth fire to create even heat without wasting fuel. In cultures from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean, a woman who can't produce consistent, edible bread is considered unfit for marriage. Your future mother-in-law might show up unannounced on baking day, watching silently as you work. One woman in a Dutch village record from 1654 had her engagement broken because she burned 3 consecutive loaves during such an inspection. The scandal followed her for years. Dairy work forms another crucial test. You're standing in the cool dimness of a spring house, learning to sense the exact moment when cream becomes butter, when curds are ready to separate from whey, when cheese needs turning. In rural communities across Europe and colonial America, dairy products often represent a household's wealth. A woman skilled in dairy management can produce surplus goods to sell at market, making her a valuable economic asset. Marriage negotiations sometimes include discussions of a woman's cheese-making reputation. It sounds absurd until you remember that a wheel of aged cheese could be worth several weeks' wages. Your training extends to herbal knowledge and basic medical care. You're memorizing which plants soothe coughs, which reduce fever, which help with childbirth pain. This knowledge passes from mother to daughter, aunt to niece, creating an informal but essential medical system. A woman who knows her herbs becomes more valuable to a potential husband's family because she can keep them alive and relatively healthy. In an era before readily available doctors, and when doctors often do more harm than good, this skill literally means the difference between life and death. Historians still argue whether this herbal knowledge represents women's power or their burden. Both, probably. You're also learning to read people, situations, household dynamics. You observe how your mother manages your father's moods, how she stretches resources during lean times, how she maintains authority over household servants or younger family members while appearing to defer to male authority. This invisible curriculum teaches you negotiation, diplomacy, resource management, and strategic thinking. These soft skills don't appear in any official requirements list, but they are absolutely essential. A woman who can't navigate complex family politics will make life miserable for everyone, and families know it. The inspection process isn't always formal or obvious. You're being evaluated constantly at church, at market, during community gatherings. Other women watch how you carry yourself. Whether you gossip appropriately or excessively, if you show respect to elders, how you interact with children, one seemingly minor social misstep, laughing too loudly and speaking too freely, dressing slightly inappropriately, can damage your reputation and marriageability. The pressure creates an exhausting performance where you're always on, always aware that invisible judges surround you. Some cultures develop specific tests or rituals. In parts of Germany, young women must demonstrate their strength and endurance by carrying heavy water buckets up hills or managing physically demanding tasks while maintaining grace and composure. In certain Italian villages, a woman's needlework undergoes formal examination by a committee of elder women who assign ratings that become public knowledge. Imagine having your skills graded and discussed openly by the entire community. The anxiety would be crushing. The economic reality underlying these requirements rarely gets discussed openly, but you understand it instinctively. Your labour will contribute significantly to your future household survival and prosperity. This isn't about romance or partnership in the modern sense. It's about economic unit formation. Two people combining their skills, resources, and labour to create a viable household. If you can't pull your weight, you're a liability rather than an asset. The pressure to prove yourself stems from genuine survival concerns, not just arbitrary tradition. You notice something interesting, though. Though, while these demands feel oppressive, they also provide you with valuable skills and a certain kind of power. You're becoming genuinely competent at complex tasks. You're developing expertise that will serve you throughout your life, regardless of marriage. Some women use these skills to remain independent, supporting themselves through spinning, weaving, baking, or herb selling. The same requirements meant to prepare you for marriage also provide potential escape routes from it. The irony isn't lost on you. The regional variations fascinate anyone studying this topic. In some areas, demonstrating literacy adds to your value, but in others, it makes you suspect, possibly too educated, dangerously independent-minded. In certain communities, physical strength and outdoor work skills matter most. In others, refined indoor accomplishments take precedence. There's no universal standard, which means a woman perfect for marriage in one village might be considered unsuitable just 20 miles away. The arbitrariness adds another layer of stress. You're 8 years old, sitting with your mother as she shows you the chest that will define much of your next decade. It's made of sturdy oak, still smelling faintly of sawdust. with iron hinges your father forged himself. This chest will hold your future. Every sheet, every pillowcase, every towel, every piece of cloth you create between now and your wedding day goes into this ox. In many European cultures, this dowry chest, called a hope chest, glory box, or trousseau trunk, depending on where you live, represents the price of admission to married life. Without it filled to acceptable standards, you're not marriageable. The pressure starts early. The specific requirements vary wildly depending on your social class and region, but the general principle remains constant. You must arrive at marriage with a substantial collection of household goods. In German-speaking regions during the 18th century, a bride typically needs at least 12 of everything. 12 sheets, 12 pillowcases, 12 tablecloths, 12 napkins, 12 towels, 12 nightgowns. Why 12? Historians still argue whether it relates to the 12 apostles, the 12 months, or simply the number that allows for laundering rotation. Regardless, you're looking at creating and acquiring hundreds of individual items, mostly by hand. You begin with the simplest items, rough kitchen towels made from coarse linen. Your stitches are uneven, the hem's wavy, but your mother nods approval. "It's a start," she says, folding it carefully into the chest. That first towel represents hope, but it also represents mathematics. If you need 12 towels and each takes roughly 8 hours to weave and finish, you're looking at 96 hours of work just for towels. Then multiply that calculation across every category. The numbers become staggering. Some women spend literally thousands of hours preparing their dowries. The finest items require years of work. You're creating bed linens from the softest linen you can produce, embroidering them with your initials and decorative patterns. These pieces showcase your skill and artistry. In parts of Italy, the quality of a woman's embroidered bedsheets becomes neighborhood legend, discussed and compared like sports statistics. Women gather to examine each other's work, offering praise or subtle criticism that everyone decodes. How industrious you've been means the work is acceptable. What interesting color choices means they're hideous. You learn this diplomatic language early. Beyond linens, you're also expected to contribute cooking equipment, spinning wheels, furniture, sometimes livestock, and actual money or valuable goods. In Scandinavian communities, a bride might need to provide specific numbers of sheep, cows, or chickens. In Mediterranean regions, olive oil, wine, or grain stores form part of the expected dowry. You're not just preparing to run a household, you're assembling the capital required to start one. Without these resources, your husband's family views you as a financial burden rather than a partner. The wealthy, of course, approach this differently. Upper-class families negotiate dowries involving property, investments, and substantial cash sums. A merchant's daughter in 17th century Amsterdam might bring thousands of guilders, shares in trading companies, or real estate to her marriage, but she still needs the linens. Even wealthy women must demonstrate that they could manage a household if necessary, that they understand the value of domestic labour, even if they will eventually supervise servants rather than doing the work themselves. The chest gets filled regardless of your bank account. For poor women, the challenge becomes nearly insurmountable. You're working as a servant, a field hand, a piece worker, trying to save money while also creating the required goods. You're spinning thread by candlelight after 14-hour workdays. You're bartering your labour, offering to help with someone's harvest in exchange for wool or flax. You can transform into dowry items. The process can take 20 years or more. Parish records from rural England show women marrying in their late 30s or early 40s, finally having accumulated enough to meet minimum requirements. Some never manage it and remain unmarried, not by choice but by economic impossibility. Communities sometimes help. In certain German villages, young women form societies where they work collectively on each member's dowry in turn. This month everyone focuses on Anna's linens. Next month they tackle Greta's. The system spreads the labour and creates social bonds, but it also means your marriage timeline depends partly on other people's productivity and goodwills. If the group hits a slow period, your wedding gets delayed. The interdependence creates both support and frustration. The Catholic Church in some regions maintains dowry funds, charitable endowments that provide small grants to poor girls so they can marry rather than facing destitution or prostitution. These funds operate with strict requirements. You must prove good character, attend religious instruction, and often the money comes with strings attached about whom you can marry and where you'll live. It's charity, but it's also social control. Still, for truly impoverished women, these funds represent the only path to marriage. Some women compete fiercely for them, lobbying parish priests and local nobles for consideration. Jewish communities develop their own dowry systems, often more formalized and legally binding. The ketubah, the marriage contract, specifies exactly what the bride brings and what protection she receives. These contracts sometimes guarantee that if the marriage ends, the woman retains her dowry goods or their value. This protection matters enormously in an era when women have few legal rights. The detailed negotiations over dowry terms can take months, with families arguing over every item's value and every clause's wording. Marriage becomes a legal transaction that happens to involve a wedding ceremony. You're also aware of the darker implications. The dowry system essentially prices women. Your value gets calculated in sheets and sheep, in coins and cookware. Women with larger dowries attract more or better marriage proposals. Women with smaller dowries face limited options or exploitation. Some men marry primarily for the dowry, caring little about the actual woman. Historians document cases where men go through multiple marriages, effectively collecting dowries as a business model. Your grandmother warns you about such men, tells you to watch for certain quinces, but how do you really know until it's too late? The system also creates terrible pressure on fathers and male guardians. They're expected to provide daughters with adequate dowries, and failure to do so brings family shame. Some fathers go into debt financing dowries. Others prioritize sons' education and careers while scrambling to marry off daughters as cheaply as possible. If you have multiple sisters, the challenge multiplies. Birth order matters. Often families focus resources on marrying off the eldest daughter first, leaving younger sisters waiting and hoping resources remain. Some younger daughters never get their turn. Occasionally you hear whispers of women who rebel. One story circulates about a girl 2 villages over who refused to spend years filling a chest, who eloped with a travelling musician and left with nothing but the clothes on her back. The story ends badly. She returns a year later, abandoned and destitute, and everyone uses it as a cautionary tale. But part of you wonders about that year of freedom, that brief escape from the chest and its endless demands. The wondering feels dangerous, so you push it away and return to your embroidery. The chest becomes a physical manifestation of time, labour, and dreams. You can open it and see years of your life transformed into fabric. Each item carries memories. The sheet you finished the summer your grandfather died. The tablecloth you embroidered while recovering from fever. The towels you made during the winter when you fell in love with the cooper's apprentice who married someone else. The chest holds your history, your skills, your hopes, and increasingly your anxiety about whether it will ever be enough. You're walking to church on Sunday morning. acutely aware that your reputation is making the journey with you. Every step, every glance, every word you exchange with neighbours gets observed, interpreted, and filed away in the collective memory of your community. In the centuries before marriage, reputation isn't just important, it's everything. A single scandal can render you unmarriageable. Regardless of your dowry size or domestic skills, you're living under a microscope. And the people holding it are experts at finding flaws. The standards are absurdly specific and often contradictory. You must be modest but not prudish, and friendly but not forward, attractive but not vain, conversational but not chatty, visible but not attention-seeking. Finding the exact middle point of each spectrum requires constant calibration. You watch other women for clues, noting which behaviours bring nods of approval and which spark whispered criticism. The older women are particularly judgmental, their sharp eyes missing nothing. They remember every misstep, every questionable moment, and they talk. Your virginity forms the cornerstone of reputation, but proving it becomes bizarrely complicated. You're expected to be innocent, but not so naive that you don't understand household management and childbirth. You should blush at crude jokes, but not act shocked. That suggests you're pretending ignorance, which implies you actually know too much. In some communities, rumours about a woman's virtue can be proven through humiliating physical examinations by midwives or elder women. The invasion of privacy is absolute. The trauma lasting. Even accusations without proof can destroy prospects, because who wants to risk marrying damaged goods? The chaperone system reaches absurd levels. You can't walk alone with a man who isn't family, can't be in a room with a closed door, can't exchange letters without supervision, can't dance more than the acceptable number of times with the same partner. In upper-class European society during the 18th and 19th centuries, elaborate rules govern every interaction. Your mother, an aunt, or a paid companion must accompany you everywhere. These chaperones aren't just present, they're actively monitoring, ready to intervene if you lean too close during conversation or let a hand touch linger a second too long. But here's where it gets interesting. Chaperones sometimes become allies. An understanding aunt might position herself where she can see you but not hear you, giving you precious moments of private conversation. A sympathetic older sister might fall asleep during a parlour visit, creating plausible deniability. The system meant to restrict you also creates opportunities for subversion. You learn to communicate through glances, through the language of fans, through coded phrases that mean one thing to chaperones and another to your intended. It's exhausting but sometimes thrilling. A game where the stakes are your entire future. The church serves as both protector and enforcer of reputation. Regular attendance is mandatory, but it's not just about piety. The church provides a legitimate space for being seen, for displaying virtue, for encountering potential suitors under respectable circumstances. You're performing religiosity, but you're also being evaluated on your performance. Do you pay attention during sermons? Do you sing hymns with appropriate enthusiasm but not excessive emotion? Do you dress modestly but becomingly? Women who skip church or seem insufficiently devout face immediate suspicion. What are they hiding? What are they doing instead? Confession creates its own complications. In Catholic communities, you're expected to confess sins regularly, but what you confess becomes known to the priest, and priests talk to families, sometimes directly influencing marriage negotiations. You're caught between spiritual honesty and strategic reputation management. Do you confess impure thoughts about the miller's son? Do you admit envy of your sister's prettier dress? How much honesty is too much? Some women develop relationships with specific priests known for discretion. Others learn to confess strategically, admitting minor failings that demonstrate humility without revealing anything actually damaging. Gossip networks operate with frightening efficiency. In a world without mass media, information spreads through conversations over garden walls, at market stalls, during communal laundry days. Women talk, and talk means power. You hear stories about girls in neighbouring villages whose reputations crumbled because someone saw them arguing with their mothers, or laughing too freely at a harvest festival, or accepting a ribbon from an inappropriate suitor. The stories serve as warnings, but also as entertainment. Everyone loves a scandal when it's not happening to them. You pray it never happens to you. The double standard burns with particular intensity. Young men can be wild, can sow their oats, can make mistakes that become amusing stories. You get no such latitude. A man's youthful indiscretions make him experienced, worldly, interesting. Your single misstep makes you ruined, unmarriageable. A cautionary tale. The unfairness of it occasionally overwhelms you. But complaining about unfairness is itself considered unseemly. You're supposed to accept these standards with grace, to see them as protective rather than restrictive. Some women genuinely internalize this view. Others simply learn to perform acceptance while seething internally. Physical appearance becomes tangled with reputation in complicated ways. You need to be attractive enough to draw interest, but not so beautiful that you attract the wrong kind of attention. Excessive beauty actually hurts some women's prospects because it suggests vanity or prompts accusations that they've used their looks manipulatively. Plain women sometimes fare better in reputation terms. They are considered safer, less likely to stray, more focused on the practical matters than appearance. But being too plain also carries risks, suggesting poor health or inferior breeding. You can't win, so you aim for that mythical middle ground, pleasantly presentable. Historians still argue whether reputation standards were primarily about controlling women's sexuality or about maintaining social order more broadly. Both, obviously, but the relative weights matter for understanding whether women had any agency within the system. Some scholars argue that women used reputation as currency, that maintaining spotless characters gave them negotiating power in marriage arrangements and community standing. Others contend that reputation served purely as a control mechanism, a way to limit women's freedom and choices. You, living inside the system, recognize elements of both. Reputation restricts you but also protects you. It limits options but also provides clear rules. The ambiguity is dizzying. Class affects reputation standards dramatically. Upper-class women face more elaborate rules but also have more resources to recover from minor scandals. A wealthy family can relocate a daughter whose reputation suffers, essentially giving her a fresh start in a new community where nobody knows her history. Poor women have no such escape hatches. Your entire life unfolds in one small area where everyone knows everyone, and memories stretch back generations. One mistake follows you forever, shaping every subsequent opportunity or lack thereof. Some communities develop formal reputation certification systems. In parts of Scotland and Ireland, parish priests issue character certificates confirming a woman's virtue and suitability for marriage. These documents get presented during marriage negotiations like credentials. Women without certificates face deep suspicion. What happened that the priest wouldn't vouch for her? The certificates create bizarre incentives. You're incentivized to be extra visible in your virtue, to perform goodness in ways the priest notices and remembers. genuine private morality matters less than witnessed public displays, you're exhausted by the constant performance, but you've also internalized much of it. When you see another young woman behaving questionably, you feel that reflexive judgment, that whisper of disapproval. You've become part of the system that constrains you, policing other women's behavior because that's what you've been taught, because vigilance becomes habit, sometimes late at night. You wonder what freedom would feel like, what it would mean to simply be yourself without calculation or performance. But morning always comes, and with it the need to maintain your reputation for one more day. You're standing in a small room off the kitchen, heart pounding, while your future mother-in-law summons the village midwife. This is the inspection you've dreaded since the marriage negotiations began. The midwife arrives with her knowing eyes and experienced hands, and you understand that your body is about to be evaluated like livestock at market in many cultures across Europe, Asia, and beyond. A woman's physical capacity for childbearing undergoes scrutiny before marriage contracts are finalized. The humiliation is profound, but refusal means the engagement ends immediately. The midwife examines your hips, pressing and measuring. Wide hips suggest easier childbirth, a crucial consideration when maternal and infant mortality rates hover horrifyingly high. She observes your overall health, checking for signs of disease, weakness, or deformity that might complicate pregnancy. In some regions, she performs internal examinations to verify virginity and assess reproductive anatomy. You're trying not to cry, trying to remain dignified while being prodded like a prize mare. Your mother stands nearby, her face carefully neutral, but you can see tension in her shoulders. If you fail this inspection, the shame extends to your entire family. The concept of fertility signs becomes an obsession. Everyone watches for indicators that a young woman will bear children easily and abundantly. Do you menstruate regularly? Are your cycles predictable? These intimate details somehow become semi-public knowledge, discussed by marriage brokers, mothers-in-law, and community matriarchs. Some cultures believe that particular physical features predict fertility: thick hair, rosy complexion, full breasts, strong teeth. You're assessed on characteristics that may or may not have any actual connection to reproductive capacity, but superstition and folk wisdom carry enormous weight in marriage decisions. In certain Chinese traditions, matchmakers examine a young woman's ears, believing their shape and size indicate fertility and temperament. In parts of India, astrologers compare birth charts to predict compatibility and childbearing success. Jewish communities sometimes consult with rabbis about family medical histories, trying to avoid unions where hereditary conditions might pass to children. Every culture develops its own pseudoscientific methods for predicting reproductive success, and you're subject to whichever system governs your particular time and place. The scrutiny feels invasive regardless of its form. Some families take inspection to disturbing extremes. Historical records document cases where potential mothers-in-law demand proof of menstruation, actual bloodied cloths shown as evidence of fertility. Other families insist on medical examinations by multiple midwives or physicians, seeking consensus on a woman's suitability. In a French village in 1702, one engagement was broken after 3 separate midwives expressed concerns about a young woman's narrow pelvis. She eventually married a widower, desperate for a housekeeper who didn't care about her childbearing prospects. But the initial rejection scarred her reputation permanently. The irony, of course, is that fertility remains largely mysterious to everyone involved. The inspections and assessments provide an illusion of control over something fundamentally uncontrollable. A woman who passes every physical examination with glowing reports might still struggle with infertility, Another woman who barely meets the physical standards might bear 10 healthy children. But acknowledging this uncertainty would undermine the entire system. So everyone pretends the inspections provide meaningful predictive information. You participate in the charade because you have no choice. Age becomes another crucial factor, but the sweet spot keeps shifting depending on culture and era. In some communities, younger is better. Girls married off at 14 or 15 are considered ideal because they have maximum childbearing years ahead. In other contexts, too young is considered risky, and families wait until girls reach their late teens or early 20s when, if their bodies are fully matured, you're caught between competing theories, hoping you're not too young or too old, that you hit the market at exactly the right moment. The pressure is immense. Historians still argue whether these physical examinations were primarily about ensuring heirs or about controlling women's bodies more broadly, in societies where lineage and inheritance flow through male lines. Producing sons becomes essential. A woman's entire value in marriage often reduces to her womb's capacity to generate male heirs. If you marry and fail to produce children, or produce only daughters, you face blame, potential divorce, or replacement by additional wives. The physical inspection before marriage serves as a down payment on this expectation, a preview of the scrutiny your body will endure throughout married life. Some women develop strategies for managing these examinations. Midwives, surprisingly, sometimes become allies. A sympathetic midwife might emphasize positive findings and downplay concerning ones, essentially advocating for the young woman. In communities where midwives hold significant authority, their word can make or break an engagement. Smart families cultivate good relationships with midwives, offering gifts or favors that might influence future reports. You're learning that even invasive systems contain opportunities for negotiation and advocacy if you know how to access them. The virginity obsession reaches particularly absurd heights. Methods for proving virginity range from the useless to the actively harmful. Some cultures believe virgins bleed on their wedding nights, except many don't due to normal anatomical variation. And many non-virgins do bleed from wedding night nervousness and rough handling. The unreliability of this test doesn't stop communities from using it. Women who don't bleed face accusations, violence, or abandonment. Some women prepare fake blood using animal bladders and berries. The deception becomes necessary survival. In certain Ottoman territories, wedding night blood-stained sheets are publicly displayed, proving consummation and virginity simultaneously. The practice turns the most intimate moment into public spectacle. Some families station relatives outside the bridal chamber, waiting for evidence. The psychological damage of such practices is immeasurable, but discussing trauma is considered weak or ungrateful. You're supposed to accept these customs as natural, traditional, simply how things are done. Questioning them marks you as difficult or dangerously modern-minded. Class differences in physical examination are stark. Upper-class families employ actual physicians. Conduct examinations in private settings with some semblance of dignity. Poor families rely on village midwives or older women with no formal training, conducting inspections in shared rooms or even semi-public spaces. The rich get privacy and professionalism. The poor get humiliation and rough handling. But regardless of class, the fundamental violation remains. Your body is not entirely your own. It belongs partly to your future husband's family, to community expectations, to reproductive imperatives that supersede personal dignity. Some women rebel in small ways. You might refuse certain examinations, risking the engagement but maintaining bodily autonomy. You might insist on having your mother or a trusted female relative present during inspections, Adding a witness to prevent the worst abuses, you might seek out sympathetic midwives known for gentleness and discretion. These small resistances don't overturn the system, but they create tiny spaces of control within an overwhelmingly controlling situation. Sometimes tiny spaces are all you get, and you learn to value them accordingly. You're 6 years old, sitting beside your grandmother while she teaches you the first embroidery stitch. The needle feels enormous in your small fingers. The thread keeps tangling, but she guides your hands with patient firmness. This lesson isn't about making something pretty. It's about beginning an education that will span the next decade or more. The womanly arts aren't optional hobbies or pleasant pastimes. They're requirements, skills that will be tested, evaluated, and ultimately determine your value in the marriage market. You're starting your professional training. Accept the profession is simply being a woman deemed acceptable for marriage. Embroidery sits at the top of the accomplishment hierarchy, especially for women aspiring to middle-class or higher marriages. You're learning dozens of different stitches, cross-stitch, satin stitch, chain stitch, French knots. Each has specific applications, and knowing when to use which demonstrates sophistication and training. By your teens, you're creating elaborate samplers that showcase your skills: alphabets, numbers, moral verses, decorative borders, tiny figures and flowers. These samplers get framed and displayed, essentially serving as your artistic resume. Potential suitors' families examine them closely, judging your patience, precision, and aesthetic sensibility through your needlework. Cooking education extends far beyond basic bread making. You're memorizing hundreds of recipes, learning regional specialties that identify you as properly trained in local traditions. In France, you must master specific sauces and pastries. In England, you're learning to manage roasting times for different meats and create proper puddings. In Italy, pasta making becomes an art form requiring years of practice. Each culture has its signature dishes, and women who can't produce them competently face criticism and diminished marriage prospects. You're literally cooking your way toward respectability. The complexity of historical cooking strikes modern observers as shocking. Without thermometers, timers, or standardized measurements, you're learning to judge everything by feel, sight, smell, and experience. You know bread dough is ready when it feels like an earlobe. You know the fire is the right temperature for roasting when you can hold your hand at oven level for exactly 3 seconds. You know cream is becoming butter when the sound of churning changes pitch. This knowledge takes years to acquire and represents genuine expertise. In odd ways, the dismissal of women's domestic skills as just cooking or just sewing erases the reality that these are legitimate crafts requiring extensive training. Herbal medicine and folk remedies form another crucial component of your education. Your mother takes you on gathering expeditions, teaching you to identify chamomile for stomach complaints, willow bark for fever, yarrow for wounds, pennyroyal for women's troubles. You're learning which plants help and which harm. A mistake could kill someone, so the stakes are high. You prepare tinctures, salves, poultices, and teas. When someone in the household falls ill, you'll be expected to know what to do, at least for common ailments. This medical knowledge makes women indispensable, though it also makes them vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft if someone dies despite treatment or if you know too much about fertility control. Some families send daughters to what amount to finishing schools, informal institutions where elite women teach domestic arts to paying students. In 18th century England, these schools offer instruction in accomplishments including embroidery, painting, music, French language and dancing, and household management. The goal is creating marriageable ladies who can manage estates and entertain appropriately. You're learning to be ornamental and useful simultaneously, a difficult balance. Too much focus on ornamental skills suggests frivolity. Too much focus on practical skills suggests low status. Finding the right mix becomes its own challenge. Music represents a particularly class-stratified accomplishment. Upper-class women learn piano, harp, or singing, instruments and skills that entertain guests and demonstrate refinement. You practice for hours daily, developing the technique that proves you've had leisure time for such pursuits. Middle-class women might learn simpler instruments or focus on singing hymns. Poor women generally have no musical training at all, lacking both time and resources. When a young woman plays piano beautifully at a social gathering, she's really announcing, "My family can afford to give me years of lessons," which translates to desirability in the marriage market. Reading and writing skills are weirdly controversial. In some eras and places, literacy is expected. You need to read recipes, keep household accounts, write letters, manage estate business if necessary. In other contexts, too much literacy seems dangerous. Can you be trusted not to read inappropriate material? Will you get ideas above your station? Might you correspond secretly with inappropriate men? Families navigate these concerns carefully, providing enough education to be useful, but not so much that daughters become uncontrollable. You're learning in a space bounded by utility and suspicion, never quite sure how much knowledge is too much. Childcare education begins early. You're expected to help raise younger siblings, learning through direct experience how to soothe crying babies, change soiled cloths, feed small children, manage childhood illnesses, and maintain authority without losing patience. By the time you marry, you should already know the basics of motherhood. This apprenticeship system works reasonably well for teaching practical skills, but it also means your entire childhood involves labour. You're rarely just a child. You're always a child in training, a future mother practicing on available small humans. Dancing lessons serve multiple purposes. Obviously, you need to dance competently at social gatherings. It's one of the few acceptable ways to interact physically with potential suitors, but dance also teaches posture, grace, spatial awareness, and social coordination. You're learning to move through spaces elegantly, to coordinate with partners, to read social cues about when to approach or withdraw. Dance masters in European courts become incredibly influential, and their approval matters enormously. A young woman who dances beautifully has mastered something that can't be faked. Either you've had training or you haven't, and it shows immediately. Historians still argue whether these accomplishments represented oppression or empowerment. Did forcing women to master domestic arts limit them by preparing them only for household roles? Or did these skills provide women with genuine expertise and household authority that translated to real power within their spheres? Both perspectives hold truth. You're simultaneously learning valuable skills and being shaped for limited roles. The education makes you competent, but also constrains you within competence boundaries defined by gender expectations. Some women discover genuine passion within these prescribed pursuits. Your embroidery moves beyond technical skill into artistry. Your herbal knowledge deepens into something approaching modern pharmacology. Your cooking becomes creative expression. Finding joy and identity within constrained options represents a kind of resistance or adaptation, making the best of limited circumstances. Other women perform these skills competently but joylessly, seeing them as obligations rather than opportunities. Both responses are valid, both are exhausting. The examination never ends. Even after marriage, your skills continue being evaluated by your husband, his family, servants, neighbours, everyone who encounters your household's products, the embroidered linens, the meals, the preserved foods, the remedies you prepare, all advertise your competence or incompetence. You're perpetually performing, perpetually being graded. The pressure to maintain standards never fully lifts. Marriage isn't the finish line, it's just a transition to a different stage of the same endless test. You're 17 years old, and your younger sister just turned 14. She's pretty, charming, skilled at embroidery, and desperately in love with the merchant's son who visits your village every spring. He seems equally smitten with her. There's just one problem. You're unmarried. According to the social rules governing your community, your sister cannot marry before you do. She must wait. The merchant's son must wait, and everyone blames you for the delay, even though you didn't create the rule and have no power to change it. The weight of your sister's future presses down on your shoulders alongside your own uncertain prospects. This age hierarchy system operates across numerous cultures with ironclad rigidity. Daughters must marry in birth order, eldest first, then the second, then the third, and so on down the line. The reasoning combines superstition with practical concerns. Some believe that allowing younger sisters to marry first brings bad luck or suggests something wrong with the older sister. Others argue it simply makes social sense. The eldest has been preparing longest and deserves first opportunity. Regardless of reasoning, the rule creates enormous pressure and frequent tragedy. You watch your sister's face as the merchant's son departs for another season, her hope dimming slightly each time. She never says anything directly, but you feel the unspoken resentment. Your parents try to hide their frustration, but you catch those meaningful glances between them. They are wondering what's wrong with you, why proposals haven't materialized, how long this waiting will continue. Every season that passes tightens the anxiety. Your sister is aging too. If you take much longer, she might miss her prime marriageable years entirely. The guilt is crushing. Some families develop creative workarounds. In certain Italian regions, if an eldest daughter seems unlikely to marry, families arrange for her to enter a convent. This technically removes her from the marriage queue, freeing younger sisters to proceed. The practice creates entire convents full of women who weren't necessarily called to religious life but were obstacles to family marriage strategies. These women spend lifetimes in religious institutions they never wanted, sacrificed to birth order and family expediency. Some find peace or purpose in monastic life. Others endure decades of bitter resentment. In other communities, families marry off difficult eldest daughters to much older men. Widowers or otherwise less desirable matches. The priority becomes removing the obstacle rather than finding an ideal match. You hear stories about young women married to men 40 years their senior, essentially serving as nurses until widowhood finally releases them. Your mother sometimes makes pointed comments about the Cooper's elderly widower, about how he's quite wealthy and would surely be grateful for a young wife. You pretend not to understand the hints, but you understand perfectly. The message is clear. Marry anyone, and just marry, so your sister can proceed. The psychological dynamics within families become toxic. Younger sisters oscillate between sympathy and resentment. Sometimes your sister holds your hand and says she doesn't mind waiting, that the right person will come for you both. Other times you catch her crying or snapping at you over trivial matters. The frustration leaking out despite her best efforts. Your relationship, once close, develops complicated layers of guilt, resentment, obligation, and love. You're trapped together in a situation neither created. Both victims of rules beyond your control, your parents face impossible calculations. Should they invest more resources in your dowry and marriage prospects, potentially shortchanging your sister? Should they lower expectations for your match to speed the process, risking family status? Should they explore those workarounds like convents or foreign relocations that might free your sister but damage you? They are making cost-benefit analyses about their daughters' lives, trying to optimize outcome in situations with no good solutions. You sometimes overhear their arguments late at night. Your father's voice tired, your mother's sharp with worry. You're the problem they're trying to solve. Occasionally, younger sisters do marry first when families bend or break the rules. This happens most often in communities experiencing demographic changes. Perhaps war has killed many young men, creating surplus unmarried women and scarce marriage opportunities. When chances arise, families sometimes let younger daughters seize them. Rules be damned, but such violations carry costs. The older daughter's reputation suffers. Neighbours whisper about what must be wrong with her, that her own family couldn't wait. The social stigma intensifies, often making her even harder to marry off later. In a fascinating historical detail, and some regions develop financial penalties for breaking birth order. Families who allow younger daughters to marry first must pay fines to local authorities or churches. The practice suggests these violations were common enough to require formal discouragement. It also reveals that wealth provides flexibility. Rich families can simply pay the fine and proceed with advantageous matches regardless of birth order. Poor families, as always, have no such escape hatches. You're bound by rules that wealthy families can afford to ignore. Historians still argue about why this practice persisted so stubbornly across diverse cultures. Some suggest it relates to property management. Marrying daughters in order prevents disputes about who gets what resources when. Others point to concerns about social disruption. If younger daughters could jump the queue, families might neglect or mistreat older ones. Still others argue it's simply about maintaining predictability and control in societies anxious about change. Whatever the original reasons, the system perpetuates itself through sheer weight of tradition. It's always been done this way. So it continues. The waiting becomes a peculiar kind of limbo. You're simultaneously hoping you'll marry soon to free your sister and dreading marriage because you haven't found anyone you actually want to marry. You're performing enthusiasm about prospects while feeling increasingly desperate and trapped. Every potential suitor gets evaluated partly on his own merits and partly on how quickly an engagement might proceed. Sometimes you consider accepting inadequate proposals just to clear the path for your sister. Your mother senses this and warns against it. A bad marriage helps nobody. But the temptation lingers. Some elder sisters develop remarkable patience and grace under this pressure. They genuinely root for younger sisters, maintaining close relationships despite the complicated dynamics. They find ways to live fulfilled lives while unmarried, contributing to households and communities, creating identities beyond marriage that provide satisfaction. Other elder sisters become bitter, withdrawn, resentful of younger siblings who represent everything they're failing to achieve. Both responses are understandable. The pressure will break anyone eventually. It's remarkable when women maintain dignity and kindness within such punishing systems. Your sister eventually corners you one evening, tears streaming. "I'm sorry," she says. "I'm sorry for resenting you. I know it's not your fault." You hold her while she cries, and you cry too because it's not her fault either. You're both trapped, both suffering, and the only thing you can do is try not to make it worse for each other. "We'll figure it out," you tell her, though you have no idea how. The waiting continues, stretching days into weeks, weeks into months, months into years, time marked by your sister's fading hope and your mounting guilt. You're 12 years old, standing in the cold pre-dawn darkness, preparing to leave your family home for the first time. A local merchant family has agreed to take you on as a household servant, not because your family is desperately poor, though you're certainly not wealthy, but because this work serves a dual purpose. You'll earn wages that contribute to your dowry fund, and simultaneously you'll demonstrate the work ethic, reliability, and domestic competence that make you marriageable for the next several years, possibly a decade or more. Your labour will be both your job and your audition for future marriage. The weight of this double burden settles onto your young shoulders as you will to kiss your mother goodbye. Domestic service becomes the primary path for young women to accumulate marriage portions while proving their capabilities. In England, during the 17th and 18th centuries, the majority of young women between puberty and marriage work as servants in other people's households. You're cooking, cleaning, laundering, mending, caring for children, tending gardens, preserving food, managing dairies, every domestic task imaginable. The work is exhausting, the hours endless, but you're accumulating both money and reputation. A good reference from your employer can make or break your marriage prospects. You're working not just for wages, but for the recommendation letter that might change your life. The wages, by modern standards, are laughably small. You might earn a few pounds annually in 18th century England, perhaps slightly more if you develop specialised skills like fine needlework or pastry making. After years of service, you've saved enough to purchase basic household necessities, some linens, a few cooking implements, perhaps a simple piece of furniture. Combined with whatever your family can contribute, it might be sufficient for marriage to a tradesman or labourer. Might be. There are no guarantees, and you're betting years of your youth on accumulating enough to meet minimum requirements. The living conditions vary wildly depending on your employer's wealth and temperament. In a prosperous household with multiple servants, you might have decent food, adequate rest, and even some training in refined domestic management that increases your value. In a struggling household where you're the only servant, you're working from before sunrise until late night, eating skips, sleeping in unheated attics, and developing neither savings nor useful skills. You're just surviving. Some employers treat servants with basic decency. Others view them as barely human, subject to physical punishment, verbal abuse, and sexual exploitation. Sexual vulnerability haunts every young woman in service. You're living in someone else's home, subject to their authority, with limited legal protections and nowhere to go if things go wrong. Masters, masters' sons, masters' male guests. Any of them might view you as available for harassment or assault. If you become pregnant, you're dismissed immediately, your reputation destroyed, your marriage prospects obliterated. The man faces no consequences. This double standard creates a constant, gnawing fear. You learn to make yourself invisible, to avoid being alone with men, to develop elaborate strategies for deflecting attention without giving offense. The mental energy required for this constant vigilance exhausts you as much as the physical labor. Some women find alternative forms of labor that contribute to marriage funds. You might work as a seamstress, taking in piecework that you complete at home. The pay is even worse than domestic service. You are paid by the item, and unless you work impossibly fast, you barely earn enough to survive, let alone save. But at least you're in your own home, away from the sexual dangers and social isolation of live-in service. Other women work in fields during harvest seasons, or in early factories once industrialization begins, or as street vendors selling food or small goods. Every option involves brutal labor for minimal compensation, but it's labor directed toward that crucial goal of accumulating marriage resources. In rural areas, agricultural labour becomes a path toward marriage funds, you're working as a dairymaid, shepherdess, or field hand, building physical strength alongside your savings. Some farmers prefer hiring young, unmarried women because they can pay them less than men while still getting strong workers. You're learning animal husbandry, crop management, and the rhythm of agricultural seasons, all useful skills for a future farm wife. But you're also developing calloused hands, sun-damaged skin, and a weathered appearance that some consider unattractive in potential brides. The work that funds your marriage might simultaneously make you less desirable in the marriage market. The irony is bitter. The timeline for accumulating sufficient marriage funds through labour stretches depressingly long. If you start working at age 12 or 13 and can save perhaps £2 to £3 annually, a generous estimate, you might have £30 to £40 by your mid-20s. Depending on your community's expectations and your potential husband's circumstances, this might be adequate or woefully insufficient. Some women work into their 30s before accumulating enough. By then, they're considered old for first marriages, and their options narrow to widowers or men with significant defects or disadvantages. You've spent your youth working toward marriage, only to find that the work itself has aged you past prime marriageability. Communities develop informal systems for evaluating women's work reputations. Employers talk to each other, sharing assessments of former servants. If you're known as hard-working, honest, and skilled, opportunities open up. If you've been dismissed from positions or if employers express reservations, finding new work becomes difficult, and your reputation suffers accordingly. The system resembles modern professional references, except that the stakes are infinitely higher. A bad employment reference doesn't just affect your job prospects, it damages your marriage prospects, your social standing, your entire future. One false accusation or personality conflict with an employer can derail your life. Some young women enter service arrangements that blur the line between employment and family fostering. You might live with relatives or family friends, working for reduced wages or just room and board, but gaining valuable connections and social capital. These positions often feel more secure and lead to better marriage matches because the family takes personal interest in your welfare and actively seeks good matches for you, but these arrangements also involve complicated obligations and dependencies. You owe loyalty and service to people who aren't quite family, but aren't quite employers either. Navigating these relationships requires diplomatic skills that have nothing to do with housework. Historians still argue whether this pattern of premarital service empowered women or exploited them. On one hand, it allowed women to earn independent income, develop skills, and exercise some choice about when and whom to marry. Women who accumulated their own marriage funds gained negotiating power in marriage arrangements. On the other hand, they were working brutal hours for minimal pay, often in vulnerable situations, delaying marriage until their youth was spent. Both things are true simultaneously. The system provided pathways while extracting enormous costs for travelling those paths. You notice that men face different expectations entirely. Young men might do apprenticeships or wage labour too, but they're learning trades that become careers. Their pre-marriage work builds toward long-term prospects, not just toward accumulating a one-time marriage payment. They're developing earning potential that continues after marriage. You're working to afford the opportunity to stop working for wages and start working without wages in your own household. The asymmetry becomes obvious once you notice it, though commenting on it would be considered inappropriately bitter or unfeminine. Some women develop genuine pride in their labour skills. You become known as the best laundress in 3 villages, or as a cook whose pastries are unmatched, or as a nursemaid whom children adore. This reputation has value beyond marriage prospects. It provides identity, self-worth, and community respect. Women who never marry sometimes support themselves comfortably through these skilled labour reputations. The work that was supposed to be temporary becomes permanent, and surprisingly, it's not always the tragedy everyone predicted. Some women find more freedom and satisfaction in self-sufficient labour than they would have found in the marriages they were working toward. But most women do eventually marry, and when they leave service, the transition is bittersweet. You're leaving behind years of your life, friendships with other servants, familiar routines, and in some cases genuinely caring employers. You're taking your accumulated savings, your reference letters, your work-hardened hands, and your carefully constructed reputation into a new phase of life. The work wasn't what you would have chosen if given unlimited options, but it was yours, your effort, your accomplishment, your contribution to your own future. That matters, even when the system that made such work necessary was unjust. You're carrying forward both pride and exhaustion, hope and wariness, as you approach the marriage you've worked years to afford. You're kneeling in the confessional booth, the wooden screen separating you from the priest's shadowy profile. Your knees ache against the hard floor, and you're mentally rehearsing what you'll say, how you'll present yourself as appropriately pious without revealing anything that might later be used against you in marriage negotiations. This weekly ritual isn't just about spiritual guidance. It's about demonstrating the religious devotion expected of marriageable women. In societies where church and community intertwine inseparably, your faith gets measured, quantified, and evaluated just like your embroidery skills or dowry size. Religion becomes another performance, another test you cannot afford to fail. Church attendance is mandatory and meticulously monitored. In many European communities, parish officials literally take attendance, noting who appears at Sunday services and who doesn't. Repeated absences without legitimate excuse result in fines, public shaming, or worse. For young unmarried women, missing church raises immediate suspicions. What are you doing instead? Whom are you meeting? What are you hiding? Perfect attendance becomes expected, but it's not sufficient. You must also demonstrate appropriate engagement. Are you paying attention during sermons? Do you know your catechism? Can you recite prayers correctly? The scrutiny extends beyond mere presence to the quality of your participation. Confirmation and First Communion represent crucial milestones in your religious education and marriageability timeline. In Catholic communities, you spend months or years preparing for confirmation, memorizing prayers, learning doctrine, and demonstrating understanding of church teachings. The confirmation ceremony itself becomes a public display of your readiness for adult responsibilities, including marriage. Without confirmation, you're considered spiritually incomplete, unsuitable for marriage in the eyes of both church and community. The pressure to perform well during examination by priests and bishops feels enormous. One wrong answer could delay confirmation and, by extension, delay marriage and prospects. Protestant communities develop their own religious requirements. You must demonstrate understanding of Scripture, ability to read and interpret biblical texts, and commitment to Reformed theology. In Puritan New England, young women undergo extensive questioning about their spiritual experiences and conversion narratives before being admitted to full church membership. These testimonies require you to articulate personal religious experiences in ways that satisfy community standards. Emotional enough to seem genuine, but not so emotional that you appear hysterical or mentally unstable. Finding that balance requires careful calibration and often coaching from family members or religious mentors. The sexual morality dimensions of religious evaluation weigh particularly heavily on young women. You're expected to embody purity, modesty, and restraint in ways that men are not. Sermons frequently emphasize women's roles as moral guardians, as potential sources of sin and temptation, as beings who must be especially vigilant against corruption. You internalize these messages, learning to police your own thoughts, behaviors, and even your body's natural responses. A priest might ask during confession whether you've had impure thoughts, and you must navigate the dangerous territory between admitting natural human feelings and revealing anything that suggests you're morally compromised. Charitable works and church service demonstrate practical piety that enhances marriageability. You're volunteering to clean the church, prepare altar linens, teach catechism to younger children, visit the sick, or contribute to poor relief efforts. These activities serve multiple purposes. They genuinely help the community, they keep you busy and supervised, and they advertise your virtue and industriousness. A young woman known for tireless church service becomes more attractive to potential husbands seeking pious wives, but the labour is real and demanding, added onto your already exhausting schedule of domestic work, dowry preparation, and reputation maintenance. Some communities require formal religious testing before marriage. Parish priests must certify that both parties understand church teachings, have been properly instructed in marital duties and responsibilities, and show no signs of heresy or dangerous beliefs. You sit through interviews where priests question your understanding of sacraments, your commitment to raising children in the faith, your willingness to submit to church authority. One woman in a Spanish village in 1685 had her marriage delayed 6 months because the priest felt her understanding of transubstantiation was insufficiently orthodox. She spent those months in additional religious instruction, essentially cramming theology like a student preparing for exams. The confessional creates particular anxieties around courtship and sexuality. As you begin interacting with potential suitors, you're navigating questions about what constitutes sin in romantic contexts. Is it sinful to enjoy a man's attention, to feel physical attraction, to daydream about marriage and what comes after? Different priests give different guidance, leaving you confused and anxious. Some priests are understanding and gentle, recognizing the naturalness of these feelings. Others are harsh and judgmental, making you feel ashamed of normal human emotions. Your spiritual life becomes entangled with your romantic prospects in ways that are psychologically complex and often painful. Religious differences complicate marriage prospects enormously. In confessionally divided Europe after the Reformation, marrying across Protestant Catholic lines creates massive problems. Your family might refuse to consider otherwise suitable matches if the man belongs to the wrong confession. Communities sometimes ostracize or punish couples who marry across religious boundaries. You hear stories about young women who converted to marry, then face suspicion and hostility in their new religious communities, never fully trusted or accepted. The stories serve as warnings about the costs of prioritizing love over religious conformity. Jewish communities maintain their own complex religious requirements for marriage. You're learning laws governing family purity, dietary restrictions, Sabbath observance, and countless other regulations that govern daily life. Your knowledge of these laws and your commitment to observing them factor into marriage negotiations. Matchmakers evaluate your religious education alongside your dowry and domestic skills. In some communities, young women study with learned female relatives or teachers, developing genuine expertise in Jewish law that provides intellectual satisfaction alongside marriageability preparation. Historians still argue whether religious requirements primarily served spiritual purposes or functioned as additional control mechanisms over women. Did churches genuinely care about women's souls and moral development, Or were religious requirements really about enforcing conformity and maintaining patriarchal authority? The answer varies by time, place, denomination, and individual clergy. Some priests and religious leaders genuinely believed they were helping women develop spiritually and preparing them for meaningful lives. Others clearly used religious authority to control and limit women's choices. You're experiencing both dimensions simultaneously, occasional genuine spiritual growth alongside constant surveillance and judgment. The performance of piety becomes second nature but also exhausting. You're always on, always demonstrating appropriate religious devotion, always careful about what you say and how you say it. You learn to speak in religiously coded language, to frame personal desires in terms of God's will, to present yourself as humble and submissive while actually advocating for your preferences. It's a sophisticated form of communication that allows you to navigate restrictive systems while maintaining some agency, but it's also fundamentally dishonest. You're constantly performing a self that may or may not match your internal experience. Some women find genuine comfort and meaning in religious practice. You develop authentic faith that sustains you through difficult times, provides community, and offers frameworks for understanding suffering and joy. Prayer becomes a real conversation with the divine rather than mere performance. Church becomes genuine sanctuary rather than just another site of evaluation. For these women, religious requirements don't feel oppressive because they align with sincere beliefs and practices, but even these women must still perform their piety publicly in ways that meet community standards, so the authentic and performative dimensions remain entangled. Others experience religious requirements as purely oppressive burdens, additional obligations heaped onto already overwhelming lists of demands. You go through the motions without genuine belief or investment, checking boxes and avoiding trouble but finding no spiritual sustenance. You might secretly doubt church teachings or resent religious authority, but can never express these doubts without risking everything. The hypocrisy required for survival creates internal conflict and sometimes lasting psychological damage. You're living split between your public religious performance and your private skepticism or indifference, and the gap between them grows wider each year. You're sitting in your father's study, though sitting isn't quite accurate, since you're standing awkwardly near the door while the men conduct business. Your father, your future father-in-law, a lawyer, and your intended husband are gathered around a table covered with documents. They are negotiating your marriage contract, discussing you as though you're a piece of property being transferred from one owner to another. Occasionally someone glances in your direction and asks a perfunctory question, but mostly you're simply present while your future gets determined by other people. The powerlessness is suffocating, but this is normal. This is how marriages happen. The marriage contract, called different things in different places and times, whether marriage settlement, marriage articles, or simply the marriage agreement, functions as a legal and financial document that has little to do with love and everything to do with property, inheritance, and risk management. These contracts specify exactly what you're bringing to the marriage, what happens to those assets during marriage, and crucially, what happens if the marriage ends through death or, more rarely, divorce. Every detail gets negotiated, argued over, and eventually written into legally binding language. Your dowry's exact composition and value, the groom's financial contributions, property rights, inheritance provisions for future children. All of it gets spelled out with precision that would impress modern corporate lawyers. The complexity of these contracts varies enormously by social class. Among aristocracy and wealthy merchants, marriage contracts run to dozens of pages, involving multiple properties, business interests, investments, and elaborate contingency clauses. Teams of lawyers spend weeks negotiating terms. Among common people, contracts might be simpler, a single page listing the bride's dowry goods and a few basic provisions. But even simple contracts carry enormous weight. They represent the only legal protection you might have, the only guarantee that your contributions won't simply disappear into your husband's control with no recourse for you or your family. Your participation in these negotiations ranges from minimal to non-existent, depending on your culture, class, and the personalities involved. In most cases, fathers and male guardians handle negotiations while you wait elsewhere. You might be consulted on minor points. Do you prefer this piece of family jewellery or that one as part of your dowry? But the major decisions happen without your input. Some progressive families include women in negotiations, at least allowing them to hear discussions and occasionally voice opinions. But this remains rare enough that when it happens, people comment on it as unusual, even scandalous. A woman too involved in her own marriage negotiations might be considered grasping, unfeminine, or dangerously independent-minded. The financial details being negotiated determine your economic security for life. What happens to your dowry during marriage? In many legal systems, your husband gains control of everything you bring, and you have no independent property rights whatsoever. He can send it, invest it, waste it, and you have no recourse. Other systems provide some protections. Your dowry might be held in trust with only the interest available for household expenses, ensuring the principal remains intact, or contracts might specify that certain items remain yours, that your husband cannot sell or dispose of them without your consent. These provisions make the difference between having some economic security and being completely financially vulnerable. Widowhood provisions receive enormous attention during negotiations. When your husband dies, and statistically he's likely to die before you do, what happens? Do you get your dowry back? Can you remain in the family home? Will you receive ongoing support from your husband's estate? These questions matter desperately because widowhood is a likely phase of your life, and widows without financial protections face poverty or complete dependence on often hostile in-laws. Your father's lawyers push for strong widowhood provisions. Your future father-in-law's lawyers resist anything that removes resources from their family's control. The negotiations can become contentious, relationships strained, marriages delayed or cancelled over these financial disagreements. Some contracts include escape clauses or conditions, provisions for what happens if certain problems arise. If the groom conceals debts, or if he proves impotent, or if specific promises aren't kept, what recourse exists? In Jewish marriage contracts, the ketubah often includes detailed provisions for divorce, specifying exactly what the wife receives if the marriage ends. These protections acknowledge that marriages sometimes fail and attempt to provide women with some security, even in worst-case scenarios. Of course, invoking these clauses often proves difficult. Proving a husband's failures, pursuing legal remedies, overcoming social pressures to simply endure problems rather than seeking divorce. But having the provisions pre-written into the contracts provides at least theoretical protection. Property inheritance for future children also gets negotiated thoroughly. Will children inherit equally, or do sons get preference? What happens if there are only daughters? Can your family properties pass to your children, or do they revert to your male relatives? These provisions affect not just your children, but your own status and security. A woman who produces the heir to significant property gains respect and protection. A woman whose children inherit nothing becomes more vulnerable to mistreatment or neglect. You're negotiating for children who don't yet exist, trying to secure their futures and, by extension, your own importance within the family you're joining. The negotiation process reveals family dynamics and power structures with brutal clarity. You watch your father, seeing how he advocates for you or fails to. How hard he pushes for protective provisions, or how quickly he concedes to the groom's family demands. You observe your future father-in-law's attitude toward these negotiations. Does he seem fair-minded and reasonable, or grasping and hostile to your interests? You're learning about the family you're joining, gathering information about whether they'll treat you as a valued member or an acquired asset. The insights are often disturbing. Historians still argue about whether marriage contracts primarily protected women or merely formalized their subordination. Some scholars point to widowhood provisions, dowry protections, and inheritance clauses as evidence that women had some legal standing and security. Others note that women's exclusion from negotiations, their lack of control over contract terms, and the difficulty of enforcing provisions all demonstrate that contracts served primarily to manage property transfers between men. Both perspectives capture partial truths. Contracts provided some protections while operating within fundamentally patriarchal systems that limited women's rights and autonomy. Some women find ways to influence negotiations despite official exclusion. You might work through your mother, who works through your father, conveying your concerns and preferences indirectly. You might develop a relationship with your intended husband that allows you to discuss contract terms with him privately, hoping he'll advocate for provisions you want. You might enlist sympathetic relatives, an uncle, a godfather, who have standing in negotiations and will push for your interests. These indirect influences don't constitute real participation, but they're better than nothing. Small exercises of agency within constrained circumstances. The emotional toll of these negotiations rarely gets acknowledged. You're listening to your financial value being calculated, watching people argue over whether you're worth various provisions and protections. You're hearing your future father-in-law try to minimize his family's obligations to you, essentially arguing that you deserve less security and support. You're realizing that your father, whom you love and trust, might prioritize maintaining good relations with your future in-laws over securing your best interests. The disillusionment can be profound. You're entering marriage having witnessed exactly how little power you have and how vulnerable your position is. When negotiations finally conclude and contracts are signed, you're sometimes allowed to witness the signing, but you rarely sign yourself. Your father signs for you, transferring you from his authority to your husband's. The ceremony of signing reinforces your status as the object of the contract rather than a party to it. You might receive a copy of the contract, though some families keep it from you, perhaps thinking you don't need to know details or won't understand legal language. Having access to your own marriage contract becomes its own small battle. Another reminder that this agreement about your life isn't really yours. You're 14 years old, and your mother places a length of undyed linen in your hands. "This will be your first sheet," she says, and the weight of that statement settles over you like the fabric itself. For the next several years, possibly a decade or more, you'll spend countless hours spinning, weaving, sewing, and embroidering the items that will fill your trousseau, that essential collection of linens and clothing that no respectable bride can marry without. The trousseau isn't just about having nice things. It's tangible proof of your industriousness, skill, and worthiness as a wife. Every stitch you take is an investment in your future, and every imperfection is a potential source of shame. The word trousseau comes from the French word for bundle or package, and that's exactly what it is, a bundle of everything you'll need to establish and run a household. But the specific requirements vary dramatically across cultures and social classes. In upper-class French society during the 18th century, a proper trousseau might include dozens of chemises, nightgowns and undergarments, multiple complete sets of bed linens, table linens for various occasions, towels of different sizes and purposes, and elaborate clothing for different social situations. The wealthy hire seamstresses to help, but even with assistance, assembling a complete trousseau takes years and costs a small fortune. For middle-class women, the trousseau represents years of personal labour. You're creating 6 to 12 sets of sheets and pillowcases, matching numbers of tablecloths and napkins, towels for kitchen and bathing, dishcloths, dusting cloths, and various specialised linens whose purposes your grandmother explains with patient detail. Each sheet requires approximately 40 hours of work from raw fibre to finished product, spinning the thread, weaving the fabric, hemming the edges, and often adding decorative embroidery or lace. The mathematics are daunting. If you need 12 sheets and each takes 40 hours, you're looking at 480 hours just for sheets. Then multiply that across every category. The embroidery on trousseau linen serves multiple purposes. Obviously, it decorates, transforming purely functional items into beautiful objects. But embroidery also displays your skill level, patience, and artistic sensibility. You're creating a portfolio of your best work that will be examined by your future mother-in-law, neighbours, and community members who visit after your wedding. The pressure to make every piece perfect is intense. You spend hours hunched over fabric, creating elaborate monograms combining your initials with your future husband's, adding decorative borders of flowers, vines, or geometric patterns. Your eyes strain in candlelight, your fingers cramp, but you keep working because imperfect trousseau items reflect poorly on your entire family. Some cultures develop specific traditions around trousseau items. In parts of Italy, brides must include a certain number of hand-embroidered nightgowns, each more elaborate than the last, with the finest reserved for the wedding night. In Scandinavian countries, woven blankets and coverlets with traditional patterns demonstrate connection to cultural heritage and mastery of regional techniques. In England, the quality of your lace-edge pillowcases and handkerchiefs indicates your refinement and attention to detail. Each tradition adds another layer of requirements, another set of expectations you must meet. The trousseau also includes your personal clothing, the garments you'll wear as a married woman. You're sewing everyday dresses for housework, nicer dresses for church and social occasions, nightgowns, undergarments, cloaks, and accessories. In eras before ready-made clothing, every single item must be hand-sewn. You're cutting fabric carefully to minimize waste, stitching tiny seams that will withstand years of washing and wear, adding closures and decorative elements. Each garment represents hours of labour, and you need enough clothing to last years because you won't have time or resources to constantly create new wardrobes once married and managing a household. The wedding dress or wedding outfit receives special attention. Though historical wedding attire differs dramatically from modern expectations, you're not necessarily creating an elaborate white gown to be worn once and preserved forever. Instead, you're often making your finest dress, one you'll wear for the wedding, but also for other important occasions throughout your life. The colour might be blue, brown, green, or whatever suits you and your family's budget. White wedding dresses don't become standard until Queen Victoria popularises them in the mid-19th century, and even then primarily among upper classes who can afford impractical white garments. Your wedding outfit needs to be beautiful but also durable and versatile, something that justifies the time and expense invested in creating it. Storage and display of the trousseau create their own traditions and anxieties. You're carefully folding each completed item, layering them in the chest or trunk that will eventually travel with you to your new home. Some items get wrapped in cloth to protect them from dust and light. Others are layered with dried lavender or other herbs to keep them fresh and deter insects. The chest becomes a kind of hope chest, literally containing your hopes for the future. You open it periodically to assess progress, to show visiting relatives, to reassure yourself that you're accumulating enough. The chest fills slowly, almost imperceptibly. Years of labour gradually transforming into stacks of folded linen. As your wedding approaches, the trousseau gets displayed for community inspection. In many cultures, this display is formal and public. Your trousseau items are spread out in your family home, and neighbours, relatives, and friends visit to examine them. They are looking at the quality of your stitching, the evenness of your weaving, the artistry of your embroidery, the appropriateness of your choices. They make comments, some complimentary, some critical, all of which will be remembered and repeated. Her hem stitching is quite fine, someone observes, and your mother glows with pride. I notice the monograms are slightly irregular. Someone else mentions, and you die a little inside. The public nature of this inspection transforms your private labour into community spectacle. Historians still argue about the economics of trousseau production. Some calculate that the labour hours invested in creating a complete trousseau, if compensated at contemporary wages, would equal months or even years of income. Families are essentially banking this labour value, transforming women's unpaid work into tangible goods that contribute to household formation. This perspective suggests trousseau represents significant economic contributions, even though they're often dismissed as merely domestic preparations. Other scholars note that this labour benefits husbands and in-laws more than the women who perform it, essentially extracting value from women's work without compensation or recognition. The emotional investment in trousseau creation runs deep. Each item carries memories and meaning. You remember spinning the thread for those sheets during the summer your brother got married, or embroidering those pillowcases while recovering from influenza, or weaving that tablecloth during the week you first met the man who eventually became your betrothed. The trousseau becomes a textile autobiography, a record of years of your life transformed into fabric. When you finally use these items in your own home, they'll remind you of your youth, your family, and the long preparation period that led to marriage. Some women discover genuine artistry and satisfaction in trousseau work. You develop real expertise in textile arts, creating items of genuine beauty and quality. Your embroidery becomes distinctive, your weaving exceptionally even. Your colour choice is sophisticated. You take pride in your work, and that pride is justified. You've developed legitimate skills that produce tangible value. Other women find trousseau work tedious and oppressive, resenting every hour spent on this endless unpaid labour. Both responses are valid. The work is simultaneously skill-building and exploitative, creative and coercive, personally meaningful and socially imposed. The trousseau you eventually bring to marriage will last years, possibly decades. These sheets will see the births of your children and will comfort you during illnesses, will cover marriage beds through all their joys and sorrows. The tablecloths will host countless family meals, holidays, and gatherings. The towels will dry thousands of hands and faces. The durability of these items means you're literally weaving the fabric of your future daily life. Every thread you spin, every seam you stitch, contributes to the material reality of your coming decades. The responsibility of creating items that must last feels enormous, but so does the satisfaction of using years later, something you made with your own hands during the long waiting period before your life truly began. You're sitting at the kitchen table while your mother explains, with unusual seriousness, why the blacksmith's son, handsome, kind, clearly interested in you, is not an appropriate match. Your father is a moderately successful wool merchant. The blacksmith, while respectable, works with his hands and earns less. We can't marry down, your mother says firmly. Think of your sisters, think of the family's standing. But neither, she adds with equal firmness. Should you set your sights on the mayor's son who has been making eyes at you at church, that family would never accept you. Don't humiliate yourself by hoping. You're caught in a narrow band of acceptability, a thin slice of the social hierarchy where marriage is possible. Step too far up or down, and doors slam shut. The concept of marrying appropriately dominates marriage negotiations across virtually every culture and time period. Social class functions like invisible bars creating cages of possibility. Aristocrats marry aristocrats. Merchants marry merchants. Farmers marry farmers. Labourers marry labourers. The system perpetuates itself through careful policing of marriage boundaries, ensuring that property, status, and power remain concentrated within specific groups. Cross-class marriages do happen, but they're exceptional, often scandalous, and usually involve specific circumstances that make them less threatening to social order. The anxiety about marrying down runs particularly strong. Your family has worked hard to achieve and maintain their current status. Your father built his wool business through decades of labour and careful management. Your mother brought a respectable dowry that helped establish the business. They've raised children with appropriate education, connections, and expectations. A daughter who marries beneath the family's status threatens all of this. It suggests the family is declining, that they couldn't attract appropriate matches, that something is wrong. Your marriage isn't just about you, it's about your family's social positioning and your siblings' future prospects. The mechanics of class evaluation are brutally parcel. People assess potential matches based on occupation, income, property ownership, family reputation, education level, even speech patterns and manners. You learn to read these signs early, developing a sophisticated understanding of who ranks where in the local hierarchy. The tanner's family, despite decent income, ranks lower because their work is considered unclean. The schoolmaster's family, despite limited wealth, ranks higher because education confers status. The baker's family sits somewhere in the middle, respected for providing essential goods but still engaged in trade. You're constantly calculating social mathematics, determining who falls within your acceptable range. Marrying up, hypergamy as scholars call it, is theoretically possible but practically difficult. Higher status families guard their boundaries carefully, scrutinizing potential matches for any deficiencies. Your dowry might be inadequate by their standards, your family connections might be insufficient, your educational accomplishments might not meet their expectations, you might lack the refined manners and cultural knowledge that higher social circles take for granted. Even if a young man from a higher status family is interested in you, his family often prevents the match, pressuring him toward more appropriate options. Some families disinherit sons who marry inappropriately, making the financial and social costs prohibitive. Yet occasionally marriages up do occur, and these instances reveal the specific circumstances that make class boundaries permeable. If you're exceptionally beautiful, unusually talented, or possess some special quality that a higher status family desires, you might be able to marry up. If a higher status family has fallen on hard times financially and needs the substantial dowry your moderately wealthy family can provide, they might accept you despite status differences. If you're connected to a higher status family through godparent relationships or other patronage networks, you might gain access to marriage possibilities normally closed to your class. These openings remain rare and unpredictable, but their possibility fuels hope and social climbing efforts. The regional and temporal variations in class systems create fascinating complexities. In some times and places, wealth can purchase social mobility. A merchant family that becomes sufficiently rich can essentially buy their way into higher social circles through strategic marriages, land purchases, and lifestyle changes. In other contexts, status is hereditary and largely immutable. No amount of money can make a commoner into nobility. You might live in a relatively fluid social environment where marriages across moderate class differences are possible, or in a rigidly stratified society where such marriages are virtually impossible. Understanding your particular system's rules becomes crucial for managing expectations and making realistic plans. The aristocracy faces its own version of these constraints, arguably more restrictive than those governing common people. Noble families obsess over bloodlines, titles, and property preservation. Marriages get negotiated like diplomatic treaties, with both families' lawyers, heralds, and advisors scrutinizing genealogies and ensuring appropriate matches. A duke's daughter who fell in love with the merchant's son, no matter how wealthy, would face absolute family opposition. The marriage would likely be prevented entirely, or if it somehow occurred, the woman would be disowned and socially ostracized. The higher you are in the social hierarchy, the less freedom you have to marry based on affection or personal preference. Historians still argue about whether these class-based marriage restrictions primarily served economic functions or maintained social order more broadly. From an economic perspective, restricting cross-class marriages keeps property and wealth concentrated within specific groups, preventing dispersion across the social spectrum. It protects elite families' economic positions and ensures that lower-class families can't access resources through strategic marriages. From a social order perspective, marriage restrictions maintain hierarchy itself, reinforcing beliefs about natural social rankings and preventing the disorder that would result if anyone could marry anyone. Both functions operate simultaneously, economics and social control intertwining inseparably. The emotional toll of these restrictions shapes countless lives. You might genuinely love someone from the wrong social class, but that love becomes impossible to pursue. You watch someone you care about marry another person because that's what their family demands, while you marry someone you barely know because they're appropriately ranked. The system treats love as irrelevant, even dangerous. Romantic feelings that cross class lines threaten social stability and must be suppressed. Some people successfully suppress these feelings, convincing themselves that appropriate marriages are best. Others carry their lost loves for lifetimes, married to suitable partners but never fully emotionally present. The visible markers of class become objects of obsessive attention. How you dress, how you speak, what you know, how you move through space, all of it signals class position and either confirms or undermines your acceptability as a marriage partner. You're constantly monitoring your own presentation and that of potential matches, reading tiny signals. Does his coat show quality tailoring or cheap construction? Does she know which fork to use at a formal dinner? Can he converse knowledgeably about current events? Does she have the posture and bearing that indicate proper upbringing? These assessments happen constantly, automatically, shaping every social interaction. Some families attempt to strategically position their children for advantageous marriages through careful investment in an education, clothing, and social connections. Your father might stretch the family budget to ensure you have music lessons, fashionable clothes, and opportunities to attend social events where you'll encounter higher status families. He's essentially gambling that these investments will yield a marriage match that elevates the family's position or at least maintains current status. Sometimes these strategies work, other times they backfire. creating expectations that can't be fulfilled and leaving families financially strained and daughters unmarried because they've been positioned for a social level they can't actually access. The gradual industrialization and social changes of the 18th and 19th centuries begin shifting these dynamics, though change happens slowly and unevenly. Growing middle classes create new social categories that don't fit neatly into traditional hierarchies. Increased geographic mobility means people can relocate and potentially obscure their origins. Romantic ideology that emphasizes love over status considerations starts influencing some marriage decisions. But even as these changes occur, class-based marriage restrictions remain powerful. You're living through transitions that will eventually transform marriage patterns. But the changes aren't happening fast enough to help you personally. The old rules still govern your options, even as whispers of different possibilities circulate through conversations and novels that suggest marriage might someday be different. You're standing before a cloudy mirror, examining your reflection with critical eyes that have been trained by years of scrutiny. Your skin should be pale, not naturally pale, but deliberately, painstakingly pale, achieved through avoiding sunlight and applying various cosmetic preparations. Your waist should be narrow, cinched to impossible measurements through increasingly tight lacing. Your posture should be perfectly upright, shoulders back, chin slightly elevated. Every aspect of your physical appearance is being judged against exacting and often dangerous standards of beauty that determine your marriage ability as surely as your dowry size or domestic skills. You're transforming your body into something acceptable, and the transformation often hurts. The beauty standards vary dramatically across cultures and time periods, but their power remains constant. In European societies from the 16th through 19th centuries, pale skin represents leisure and refinement. Only peasants who work outdoors have tanned skin. You're avoiding sunlight religiously, wearing wide-brimmed hats and long sleeves even in summer heat. You're applying white lead paint to your face and arms, creating an artificial pallor that slowly poisons you. Lead cosmetics cause skin damage, hair loss, and eventually serious health problems including brain damage and death. But these risks are considered acceptable prices for beauty. Some women die young from lead poisoning, their desire for pale skin literally killing them. Corsetry becomes both art form and torture device. You begin wearing stays, the precursor to Victorian corsets, in childhood, training your body to accept increasingly restricted breathing and movement. By your teens, you're lacing tightly enough to reduce your waist measurement by several inches, compressing your ribs and internal organs into unnatural configurations. The pain is constant. You can't breathe deeply, can't bend comfortably, can't eat normal meals without discomfort. But the fashionable silhouette requires this sacrifice. A woman with a naturally thick waist, no matter how healthy and strong, is considered less attractive than one who has literally reshaped her skeleton through years of tight lacing. Hair receives obsessive attention, with standards that change frustratingly across eras. In some periods, hair should be elaborately dressed and powdered, requiring hours of daily maintenance and applications of pomades that attract insects. In other eras, natural but perfectly groomed hair is preferred. Regardless of specific styles, your hair's colour, thickness, and manageability affect your perceived attractiveness. Thin or coarse hair is considered unfortunate, thick, lustrous hair is an asset. Some women resort to supplementing their natural hair with wigs, hairpieces, or extensions made from other women's hair, purchased from poor women who sell their hair for desperately needed income. teeth present another anxiety. In eras before modern dentistry, dental health is largely a matter of luck and genetics. Tooth decay is common, tooth loss nearly universal by middle age. Having good teeth in your youth becomes a marriageability asset. It suggests good health, good breeding, and at least several years of ability to chew properly before inevitable decay sets in. Some cultures develop the horrifying practice of pulling young women's healthy teeth and replacing them with artificial ones to prevent future decay, essentially destroying good teeth to avoid the embarrassment of naturally deteriorating ones. The logic is insane, but the practice persists because appearance trumps health. Facial features are scrutinized through cultural beauty standards that often privilege specific ethnic characteristics while denigrating others. In many European contexts, small noses, large eyes, delicate features, and specific facial proportions are idealized. Women whose features don't match these standards are considered less attractive, regardless of their other qualities. Some use cosmetics to create illusions, shading to make noses appear smaller, techniques to make eyes appear larger. Others simply accept their supposed deficiencies and hope other attributes compensate. The arbitrary nature of these standards is obvious, but pointing out that arbitrariness does nothing to reduce their power. Body size and shape standards also vary across cultures and eras, creating moving targets for acceptability. In some contexts, plumpness is valued. It signals wealth, adequate nutrition, and fertility. Women in these times and places eat heartily and are praised for their healthy flesh. In other periods and places, slenderness is idealized, and women restrict their diets dangerously to achieve fashionable thinness. You might be exactly the same woman, but your body would be considered beautiful in one era and unacceptable in another. The unfairness of this, that your natural body type might randomly align with or violate current standards, creates ongoing anxiety. Diet and nutrition become complicated by the beauty concerns. You're receiving advice, some helpful, much harmful, about eating practices that supposedly enhance beauty. Certain foods are believed to improve complexion, others to damage it. Vinegar is consumed in excessive quantities because it supposedly promotes pallor. Arsenic is ingested in small doses as a beauty treatment, slowly poisoning women who are desperate to achieve fashionable appearances. The lack of scientific understanding about nutrition means beauty advice often contradicts health needs, and women suffer the consequences. Posture training begins in childhood and continues through your teens. You're walking with books balanced on your head to perfect your carriage. You're practicing sitting with spine straight, never allowing your back to touch a chair. You're learning to move gracefully through spaces, to enter rooms with poise, to manage heavy skirts without tripping. Deportment masters in upper-class contexts actually teach these skills formally, drilling young women in the specific ways of moving that signal refinement and proper breeding. Poor women receive informal but equally rigorous training from mothers and female relatives who understand that grace and posture affect marriage prospects even in lower classes. Hand care becomes another focus. Your hands should be soft, unmarred by rough work, difficult to achieve when you're actually required to demonstrate domestic skills that involve cooking, cleaning, and textile work. You're applying various creams and oils, wearing gloves whenever possible, trying to prevent calluses and roughness that suggests manual labour. Upper-class women can more easily maintain smooth hands because they have servants doing the roughest work. Common women struggle with the contradictory demands. They must work hard to prove industriousness, but somehow maintain hands that don't show that hard work. Historians still argue about whether beauty practices primarily resulted from male preferences or represented women's internalized oppression, or whether these categories even make sense. Some scholars emphasize that beauty standards served patriarchal systems by making women focus energy on appearance rather than developing other capabilities. Others note that beauty practices gave women some control over their presentation and marriage prospects in societies where they had few other tools for influencing their fates. The reality likely includes both dimensions. Beauty standards constrained women while simultaneously providing avenues for limited agency. Some women resist beauty demands, refusing dangerous cosmetics or rejecting uncomfortable fashions. This resistance carries costs. They are considered less attractive, face criticism for insufficiently maintaining their appearance, may struggle to find acceptable marriage partners, but they preserve their health and dignity, making trade-offs that prioritize well-being over conformity. Other women embrace beauty practices enthusiastically, finding pleasure in adornment and self-presentation, experiencing beauty work as creative expression rather than oppression. Both responses are valid. Both reflect different ways of navigating impossible situations. The market for beauty products and services grows substantially during the 18th and 19th centuries, creating an entire economy around women's appearance. Shops sell cosmetics, perfumes, hair products, and fashion accessories. Beauty advisors offer consultations. Dressmakers, milliners, and hairdressers build businesses serving women's beauty needs. This commercialization creates jobs but also intensifies pressure. When there's profit in making women feel inadequate about their appearance, the standards become more elaborate and less achievable. Ensuring continued consumption of products and services, you eventually develop a complicated relationship with your own appearance. Some days you see yourself as acceptably attractive, meeting enough standards to be marriageable, or other days you're convinced you're hopelessly flawed, too tall or too short, too pale or not pale enough, too thin or too plump. The standards themselves feel like moving targets, changing based on who's judging and what they value. You learn to present yourself as confidently as possible, to emphasize your better features and minimize less favorable ones, to work within the narrow parameters of acceptability that govern your particular time and place. It's exhausting, but it's also necessary, and you've long since stopped questioning whether it should be otherwise. You're lying fully clothed under a quilt with a young man, a wooden board separating your bodies, while your parents sleep in the next room. This is bundling, an actual courtship practice in parts of colonial America and Northern Europe, and it's simultaneously intimate and absurd. You're supposed to be getting to know each other, talking through the night, building emotional connection without physical contact. The board theoretically prevents anything inappropriate, though whether it actually works depends on the couple's determination and creativity. This bizarre ritual represents just one of many courtship practices that manage to be simultaneously restrictive and surprisingly personal, creating spaces for connection within elaborately controlled circumstances. Courtship rituals vary wildly across cultures, but they share common features: supervision, limitation, and codified behaviors that allow young people to interact while maintaining propriety. You're never simply spending time naturally with someone you're attracted to. Instead, you're performing courtship according to specific rules that everyone understands and monitors. In upper-class European society, you're receiving male callers in your family's parlour, always with a chaperone present. The young man sits at a prescribed distance. Conversation topics are limited to safe subjects, and the visit lasts exactly the acceptable duration, long enough to demonstrate interest but not so long as to suggest impropriety. The language of flowers becomes an elaborate communication system in 19th century courtship. different flowers and arrangements carry specific meanings. A red rose signifies passionate love. Yellow roses indicate friendship. White lilies suggest purity. You're learning this complex vocabulary, decoding the bouquets that arrive at your home, selecting your own floral responses to send careful messages. A young man might send you forget-me-nots, true love, combined with ivy, fidelity, and you respond with pink camellias, longing for you. Or, if you're not interested, yellow carnations, rejection. The system allows for communication that will be inappropriate if stated directly, creating a coded language that chaperones might miss or choose to ignore. Walking out. The practice of taking chaperoned walks with potential suitors provides another controlled interaction opportunity. You're strolling through public spaces where neighbours can observe, maintaining appropriate distance, keeping conversation light and appropriate. But the walks also allow for slightly more privacy than parlour visits, especially if your chaperone is sympathetic and walks a few paces behind. You might exchange a few whispered words, allow your hands to brush briefly, share glances that communicate more than words could. These tiny moments of connection feel enormous when most of your interactions are heavily supervised. Letter writing creates opportunities for more intimate communication, though letters themselves are often monitored. You're composing careful notes that could be read by parents or guardians, expressing feelings in ways that are romantic but not too forward, interested but not separate. Young men's letters to you get screened by your father or mother before you see them. Your letters to them pass through similar scrutiny. You're learning to write in ways that communicate on multiple levels, surface content that satisfies senses, plus subtle undertones that your intended recipient understands. The skill required for this double writing is considerable. Some communities develop evening visiting traditions where young men come to young women's homes after dinner. In parts of rural America and Europe, this sitting up happens in the kitchen or parlour, usually with family members present or nearby. The young couple sits by the fire, talking quietly, while parents or siblings occupy the same room doing evening tasks. The arrangement provides more relaxed interaction than formal daytime calls, but supervision remains constant. You're hyper-aware of your family's presence, careful about what you say and how you sit, performing appropriateness even in relatively casual settings. Dancing provides socially sanctioned physical contact that would be scandalous in other contexts. At community dances or balls, you can hold hands with a young man, feel his hand on your waist during certain dances, make eye contact, and speak relatively privately amid the noise and movement. The physical proximity is thrilling after so much enforced distance. But dancing also involves complex rules. You can't dance too many times with the same partner without creating scandal. You must accept or decline invitations gracefully. You must maintain appropriate distance and demeanour even while touching. The rules simultaneously permit and restrict, creating windows of opportunity within carefully managed circumstances. Gift-giving follows strict protocols that communicate intentions and relationship stages. A young man might give you a book, handkerchief, or small piece of jewellery at appropriate courtship moments. These gifts must be valuable enough to show serious interest, but not so valuable as to suggest inappropriate obligations. You're supposed to accept gifts graciously if you return his interest, or politely refuse them if you don't. Accepting a gift implies willingness to continue the courtship, creating an unspoken agreement that everyone understands. The gifts themselves often carry symbolic meanings. A book of poetry suggests intellectual connection. A locket implies emotional intimacy. Practical items like sewing scissors indicate thoughts of future domestic life together. Historians still argue about how much genuine connection actually developed within these restrictive courtship systems. Some scholars emphasize that couples who eventually married often knew each other only superficially, having had limited opportunity for real conversation or emotional intimacy before the wedding. Others point to evidence of deep emotional bonds developing even within constrained circumstances, noting that humans are remarkably creative at building connections despite obstacles. Both perspectives hold truth. Some couples enter marriage as near strangers, while others develop genuine understanding and affection despite limited interaction opportunities. Parental veto power looms over all courtship activities. Even if you and a young man develop strong feelings, your parents can end the courtship at any time. They might decide his financial prospects are inadequate, his family insufficiently respectable, or simply that they don't approve of him. Your feelings about the matter carry some weight, especially if you're from a relatively progressive family, but ultimately, your parents' decision is final. You hear stories about young women whose courtships were terminated against their wishes, who spent years grieving lost loves while being pressured toward more appropriate matches. Some young people develop strategies for circumventing restrictions. You might arrange to accidentally encounter a young man at market or church, creating brief unsupervised interactions. You might recruit sympathetic siblings or friends to carry messages or provide alibis. You might use coded language in letters that censors don't catch. These small rebellions represent attempts to claim some autonomy within controlling systems, though they also carry risks. Getting caught in unapproved communication can destroy courtships and damage reputations beyond repair. The duration of courtship varies but often stretches frustratingly long. A young man might call on you for months or even years before proposing, both parties slowly accumulating resources and parental approval necessary for marriage. The waiting tests patience and commitment, allowing time for second thoughts, but also creating anxiety. What if he loses interest? What if someone better comes along for either of you? What if your feelings change? The extended timeline means courtship itself becomes a kind of endurance test, evaluating not just compatibility but willingness to persist through bureaucratic and financial obstacles. Class differences in courtship practices are stark. Upper-class courtships involve elaborate rituals, formal visits, chaperones, and lengthy negotiations. Working-class courtships might be simpler meetings at work, brief conversations at church, a few walks together before deciding to marry. Poor couples often can't afford extended courtships. They need to marry and establish households quickly, so both partners can contribute to family income. The luxury of lengthy, carefully supervised courtship belongs primarily to families with resources to support daughters through extended waiting periods. You're developing complicated feelings about the young man you're courting. Do you actually like him? Or have you convinced yourself you do because he's appropriate and your options are limited? Do you enjoy his company? Or are you performing enjoyment because that's expected? Can you even know your genuine feelings when you've never spent time together without supervision? Never had a fully honest conversation? Never seen how he behaves when no one's watching? These questions haunt you, but there's no way to answer them within current circumstances. You're expected to make a lifetime commitment based on limited information, and the uncertainty is terrifying. You're 28 years old, sitting at the dinner table while your uncle makes another joke about your unmarried status. "Still waiting for the perfect prince, are we?" he chuckles, and everyone laughs except you and your mother, whose jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. You've heard these jokes for years now. Watch the community's attitude shift from patience to concern to barely concealed pity or contempt. You're approaching that dreaded category, spinster, old maid, the woman who couldn't or wouldn't marry. But what no one at this table knows is that you've made a choice. 3 different men have proposed over the years, and you've refused them all, not because you're waiting for perfection, but because you've glimpsed something beyond marriage. Some possibility of a life that belongs to you alone. The breaking point comes differently for different women, but it always involves recognizing that the costs of conforming outweigh the benefits, that the life you're being pushed toward isn't one you can survive. For some women, it's a specific moment, watching a friend trapped in an abusive marriage, seeing your sister's spirit slowly crushed by endless childbearing, witnessing your mother's complete subordination to your father's will. For others, it's a gradual accumulation of refusals, each one slightly easier than the last, until you realize you've backed yourself into permanent spinsterhood and you're not actually unhappy about it. Elopement represents the most dramatic form of rebellion against controlled marriage processes. You're climbing out a window in the middle of the night, meeting a young man your family has forbidden you to see, running away together to marry without parental consent in a distant village where nobody knows your history. These romantic escapes occasionally work. The couple finds happiness together, families eventually reconcile, and the scandal fades. But more often, elopements end badly. The young man might abandon you after getting what he wanted, leaving you ruined and unmarriageable. The couple might find that passion doesn't compensate for poverty, family rejection, and social ostracism. The stories circulate as warnings, yet some women still choose this path, preferring uncertain freedom to certain constraint. Outright refusal of marriage proposals creates different kinds of scandal. When you turn down an appropriate suitor, people demand explanations. What's wrong with him? What's wrong with you that you're so choosy? Don't you understand this might be your best or last chance? Your parents might pressure, plead, or rage. Your community might gossip about your pride, your foolishness, your mysterious flaws that make you reject acceptable matches. But you hold firm, recognizing that marrying someone you don't want to marry would be worse than facing social disapproval. Some women refuse specific proposals while remaining theoretically open to marriage. Others reach a point where they're refusing the institution itself. Entering religious life provides a socially acceptable alternative to marriage for Catholic women. Though the motivations vary wildly, see. Some women genuinely feel called to religious vocations, finding spiritual fulfillment in monastic communities. Others choose convents primarily as escape routes from marriages they don't want or family situations they can't endure. Convents offer education, community with other women, productive work, and relative autonomy within structured religious contexts. You're still under authority and following strict rules, but you're not subject to a husband's complete control, not bearing children until your body breaks, not managing households that never feel fully yours. For some women, convent life represents genuine freedom despite its restrictions. Remaining unmarried and supporting yourself requires developing income sources, which means either inheriting money or finding work that pays adequately for independence. You might become a seamstress, teacher, shopkeeper, or boarding house operator, occupations that allow self-support without male providers. The work is hard, the income often barely sufficient, and the social status of unmarried working women is ambiguous at best. But you're making your own decisions, keeping your own earnings, and living according to your own preferences within economic constraints. Some women find this trade-off worthwhile, preferring economic struggle with autonomy over financial security with subordination. Living with female companions or relatives creates another model for unmarried women's lives. You might share a home with a sister, cousin, or close friend, pooling resources and providing mutual support. These households of whims sometimes attract suspicion. What are they doing without male supervision? But they also demonstrate that women can create functional, even happy, lives without husbands. The relationships within these households vary from purely practical arrangements to deeply intimate partnerships that fulfill emotional and sometimes physical needs that society assumes only marriage can meet. Some women become perpetual daughters, remaining in their parents' homes and eventually caring for aging parents. This role provides security and purpose, but also limits independence. You're still under your father's authority, still subject to family decision-making processes that don't fully include you as an adult. When your parents die, you might finally gain independence, inheriting the family home and whatever resources remain. Or you might find yourself dependent on married siblings, living as the unmarried aunt in someone else's household, useful for childcare and housework, but never quite having full adult status. Historians still argue about what spinsterhood meant for women in various historical contexts. Some scholars emphasize the marginalization and economic vulnerability of unmarried women, their exclusion from full social participation, their lack of legal protections and economic opportunities. Others point to evidence of spinsters who lived satisfying, productive lives, who exercised more autonomy than their married sisters, who formed meaningful relationships and contributed significantly to their communities. Both perspectives capture real experiences. Some spinsters suffered greatly, others thrived, and many experienced complicated mixtures of hardship and freedom. The economic realities of refusing marriage hit particularly hard for women without independent means. If you don't have family wealth or inheritance prospects, supporting yourself as an unmarried woman means poverty or near poverty for most occupations available to women. You're choosing between comfortable subordination in marriage and struggling independence as a spinster. The choice isn't between good and bad options, it's between different forms of hardship, and which form you can better endure. Some women choose security despite its costs, others choose autonomy despite its deprivations. Neither choice is easy or obviously correct. Some women who refuse marriage become cautionary tales. Their stories used to frighten younger women into compliance. You hear about the spinster aunt who died alone and impoverished, about the woman who rejected proposals and now regrets it in bitter old age, about the prideful girl who aimed too high and ended up with nothing. These stories are sometimes true, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes completely fabricated. But their function is clear. They're meant to enforce conformity by making alternative paths seem inevitably tragic. The stories work on some women, convincing them to accept unsatisfactory marriages rather than risk spinster fates. They don't work on others, who see through the manipulation or who decide that even the worst spinster outcomes beat the worst marriage outcomes. Other women who refuse or escape marriage become inspirational figures, though usually only in retrospect. The unmarried aunt who ran a successful business, the spinster school teacher who educated generations of children, the woman who never married but lived richly and fully. These stories exist too, though they circulate less widely than cautionary tales. Some women discover these alternative narratives and draw courage from them. You realize you don't have to follow the prescribed path, that other women have survived and even flourished outside marriage, and their existence proves that you might too. The decision to refuse marriage or escape its demands isn't made once and then finished. It's a daily choice, constantly tested by social pressure, economic hardship, moments of loneliness, and second-guessing. Some days you're confident in your choice, proud of your independence, satisfied with your life. Other days you wonder if you made a terrible mistake. if you have traded one form of misery for another, if you should have just married someone appropriate and made the best of it like everyone said, the uncertainty never fully resolves. But you keep choosing yourself, keep insisting on your right to a life that doesn't require marriage, and somehow the days add up to years, and the years become a life. You're standing in your childhood bedroom on the night before your wedding, and everything feels surreal. Tomorrow you'll put on that dress you spent months creating, walk into the church where you've attended services your entire life, and emerge as someone's wife. The woman you've been for 23 years will cease to exist in any legal or social sense. Your name will change. Your home will change. Your daily routines and responsibilities will transform completely. You're finishing the final preparations, checking that your trousseau is packed correctly, reviewing the items on endless lists your mother has made, trying on your wedding shoes one more time to ensure they fit properly. But beneath all this practical activity, something deeper is happening. You're saying goodbye to yourself, to the girl and young woman you've been, and trying to imagine the married woman you'll become tomorrow. The physical preparations are elaborate and time-consuming. You're bathing carefully, washing your hair with special preparations, applying the creams and ointments that supposedly ensure beauty and fertility. Female relatives hover around you, offering advice, sharing stories of their own wedding preparations, helping with tasks you can't manage alone. Your mother is unusually emotional, oscillating between joy and sadness. She's gaining status as the mother of a married daughter. But she's also losing you, the daughter who has lived under her roof, who she's taught and shaped for this moment. The complicated emotions flow between you unspoken, expressed through gentle touches and meaningful glances rather than direct conversation. Your trousseau sits in its chest, ready for transport to your new home. You open it one more time, running your hands over the linens you've created over so many years. Each item carries memories: the sheet you embroidered while recovering from fever, the tablecloth you finished the week your grandmother died, the pillowcases you made during the summer you first met your betrothed. These textiles represent years of your life, thousands of hours of labour, and they are about to begin their working lives in the household you'll manage. The transition feels momentous. These items have been potential for so long. Tomorrow they become actual, functional parts of daily married life. The marriage contract has been signed, the financial arrangements finalised, but you still don't fully understand all the implications. Your father explained some provisions, but others remain mysterious, discussed in legal language you couldn't fully follow. You know your dowry is now legally your husband's to manage. You know certain property protections exist if he dies before you. You know that children you bear will belong to him legally more than to you. The specifics blur together, but the general principle is clear. Tomorrow you legally become subordinate. Your identity subsumed into your husband's. Your independent legal existence essentially ending. You think about your husband, trying to imagine daily life with him. You spent time together during courtship, but always supervised, always performing appropriate behaviour for observers. You don't really know how he'll be when no one's watching, whether the patience and kindness he's shown during courtship will persist, or whether marriage will reveal different, possibly darker, aspects of his character. You're gambling your entire future on limited information, making an irreversible decision based on supervised conversations and family investigations. The uncertainty is terrifying, but it's also normal. Every woman you know made this same leap into the unknown. Most survived it, some even found happiness. You're hoping you'll be among the fortunate ones. Your sisters visit your room, ostensibly to help with preparations, but really to spend final time with you before everything changes. You've shared this room with them for years, whispered conversations after parents thought you were sleeping, comforted each other through disappointments and celebrated small joys. Tomorrow you won't live here anymore. You'll visit, certainly, but as a guest in what was your childhood home. The realization makes you suddenly tearful. Though you try to hide it, your younger sister, only 14, looks at you with wide eyes that contain both excitement about your wedding and fear about her own inevitable future. You want to tell her something comforting or wise, but you don't know what to say. You're as uncertain as she is. Historians still argue about what brides actually felt on their wedding eves, whether most women approached marriage with joy, dread, resignation, or complex mixtures of all three. The historical record preserves mostly public expressions and formal documents, not private emotional truths. A few diaries and letters survive that suggest genuine happiness, others that reveal terror or despair, but most women left no written record of their feelings. You wonder what future historians would make of your emotional state if somehow it could be recorded. Probably they'd debate whether you represent typical experience or exceptional case, whether your mixed feelings reflect historical conditions or individual personality. The thought is oddly comforting. Maybe uncertainty itself is the universal human experience across all times and places. The symbolic transition rituals vary across cultures, but they all mark the same fundamental shift. In some traditions, you'll ceremonially leave your family home, walking backward while weeping to show reluctance to leave, though whether the tears are genuine or performative, no one asks. In others, you'll be symbolically given away by your father, literally transferred from one man's authority to another's. Some cultures practice ritual cutting of hair or changing of clothes, physical markers of the identity transformation. Whatever the specific practices, they all acknowledge that something profound is happening, that the woman entering the church isn't quite the same person who will emerge from it as a wife. Your wedding night looms in your thoughts, though you try not to dwell on it. You've received some instruction, awkward, elliptical conversations with your mother about marital duties, whispered advice from married friends, cryptic warnings about pain and patience, but the specifics remain vague, simultaneously overemphasized as crucial and underexplained as too delicate to discuss directly. You're expected to submit, to please, to endure, and somehow through this process to conceive the children that will validate your marriage and secure your position. The pressure is enormous, and the lack of clear information makes everything more frightening. You're also thinking about the future stretching beyond tomorrow, the years of childbearing ahead, the household you'll manage, the person you'll become. Will marriage make you happy? Will you find satisfaction in the roles you'll perform? Will you maintain your sense of self, or will you gradually disappear into wife and mother identity until you can't remember who you were before? You look at your mother, trying to see if she's happy, trying to determine whether her life represents a future you can accept. Her face reveals nothing definitive. She seems content enough, but is contentment the same as happiness? You realize you're not sure, and probably will never know. Sleep evades you for hours. You lie in your childhood bed for the last time, listening to familiar night sounds, your sister's breathing, the house settling, distant dogs, wind in the trees. Tomorrow night you'll sleep in a different bed, in a different house, beside a man who will have legal rights to your body and your life. The transformation feels impossible and inevitable simultaneously. You're trying to memorize this moment, this last night of being purely yourself, but already it's slipping away. Time moves forward regardless of your readiness. Morning will come whether you're prepared or not. Eventually, exhaustion overcomes anxiety, and you drift into restless sleep. You dream confused fragments, your childhood, your betrothed, your grandmother, the church, running through fields, being unable to move, when you wake to your mother's gentle touch and the grey light of pre-dawn. You feel simultaneously like you've slept for minutes and for years. "It's time," your mother says softly, and you nod, rising to face the day that will divide your life into before and after, girl and wife, preparation and reality, the preparations of years, the dowry accumulated stitch by stitch, the skills learned through endless practice, the reputation carefully maintained, the tests endured and passed, all culminate in this single day. Everything you've been taught, everything you've prepared, everything you've become was meant to bring you to this moment. And now the moment is here, and somehow, despite all the preparation, you don't feel ready. But readiness, you're realizing, was never really the point. The system demands compliance, not readiness. It requires your participation in rituals perfected over generations, your acceptance of roles that predate you and will continue after you. You're one woman in an endless procession of women who have walked this path, who have transformed from daughters into wives, who have left the known for the unknown, because that's what women do, what they've always done, what they'll continue doing long after you're gone. You take a deep breath, feel your sister's hand steadying you as you stand, and begin preparing for the day that ends your preparations and begins your life as the person you've spent years becoming qualified to be. A wife, ready or not, willing or not, hopeful or fearful or all of these at once. The journey demanded everything, and now the journey is over and the destination is here, and there's nothing left to do but step forward into whatever comes next, carrying with you all those years of demands met and tests passed and patience exercised, hoping there'll be enough for the lifetime ahead. The demands fade into memory now, those years of preparation softening into distant images like old photographs. You can rest now. Let those expectations drift away like autumn leaves on a gentle stream. The women who came before you, the women who struggled and adapted and survived, they understand. They're with you in the quiet darkness, a sisterhood across centuries, all breathing slowly together. Let your shoulders relax, let your jaw unclench, let your hands unfold. The story is told, the history is known, and you can simply be, without performing, without proving, without preparing for anything at all. Tomorrow will come in its own time, but tonight belongs to rest, to the soft space between waking and dreaming, where nothing is demanded and everything is forgiven. Sleep now, gently, peacefully, knowing that you've heard their stories and honoured their struggles simply by listening. The past releases its hold, the night embraces you. And in this moment, finally beautifully, you are enough exactly as you are.